All right, today we're going to talk about another great guy, George MacDonald. Author, I should say, because there's boy and girl authors. He is somebody that I didn't know anything about until recently, to like the last year. And that's really sad because he is amazing and his works are amazing. And I had no idea what kind of major impact he's had on 20th century literature. And I was reading some stuff online, and I can't remember who it was. Some Christian writer was like, you know, kind of basically shame on us, shame on the schools for not bringing his works forward and using them in the schools and things, because it's great stuff. He was Scottish. He was born in Scotland in 1824, lived to 1905. So pretty long, happy life. He was born in a Calvinist, I can't remember what the exact religion, what their little church was called, but it was a Calvinist type religion. And there's a little anecdote about him, which we don't know if it's really true, but it's indicative of his character, so I'll tell you it. It's said of him that one day when he was young, he was attending church, and that Sunday, the doctrine of predestination was taught, and he began to cry and left the church. It was indicative of everything that he wrote and did, and the sermons that he later taught as a sermon as a pastor, that he believed in the great love of God, and he ultimately had a really hard time believing in a concrete hell. I mean, I guess he kind of did, but he really rejected the doctrine of predestination and remained a Christian, but was moved away from his Calvinist background because he couldn't believe that God would choose only certain people to be saved, and that God didn't love all his children and want all his children to return to him. And he taught from his pulpit a lot the great love of God and the salvation of Christ and those great principles. And so he did become a pastor and preached quite a bit, but the kinds of things in the area where he lived, it wasn't always as well received. He got to the point where he wrote his sermons down and had collections of his sermons published. In fact, one interesting thing of note that about him is that later on, Lewis was greatly influenced by MacDonald. I'll talk about that in a minute. But during Lewis's life, I didn't know this either, Lewis has a character in his Great Divorce, and I've read The Great Divorce several times. I absolutely love it, and I can't remember if the guy's name is MacDonald. Seems like maybe it is. Of course, it didn't mean anything to me until now, until I realized that that's George MacDonald that serves as a mentor in The Great Divorce. He also put together a collection of some of George MacDonald's best sermons, and he called it George MacDonald, an Anthology, because he loved George MacDonald's theology. And he learned a lot by George MacDonald's theology, and so he put together this collection of his sermons. So that would be a fun thing to get and read. So he meets Louisa. They date and marry. They have 11 children, and she was really small, and she had this really slim waist. And it was always kind of this joke that after she had all her children, she regained her small figure and her tiny waist. And when they toured America, people wouldn't believe that this little tiny woman could have 11 children. And he carried this picture with him to prove that she had had all these kids. So that's kind of cute. They had a very happy marriage. He died 3 years before her, I think. And several of their children died of tuberculosis. He said that disease haunted their family. I think 4 of the kids died from it, which was really sad. But he was a wonderful father and loved his children dearly. They had a very happy family. And it was kind of this love of God, salvation kind of idea that he had about life and family that I think he was that kind of man. I think that he was the kind of man that would have a happy family because he was such a loving, giving man. Now, he had great influence. There were people that influenced him too, but it's interesting now to look back and see that the people that he was influencing actually had bigger names than many of the people that influenced him. As mentioned, C.S. Lewis is one of them. He called George MacDonald his master, and he said that when he read, it's called Fantastes, and I've not read it. Most of his most popular works are fantasies. I've got his younger children's, Princess and Goblin, Princess and Curdie. Absolutely love them. We've got both of those here. I'm gonna read his Lilith and Fantastes are two of his other really famous books. Lewis said that when he read it, he crossed into he entered a great frontier. And Chesterton, who had a huge impact also on Lewis, who also has written really fabulous. Now these are Christian apologists, right? Like these are men, and Untitled L'Engle is another one, who was one of my favorites. And this was what was so cool, is when I was first introduced to Princess and Curdie. Then I found Princess and the Goblin, and then I went in, of course, to find out about the author and the background of the book, like we're supposed to do, right? And I found out about George MacDonald, that he influenced some of my very favorite authors. I was floored that I hadn't heard his name earlier and that I had never made this connection, but was so grateful to. So Chesterton, also a Christian apologist, but all of these people wrote novels as well. I just finished A Man Called Thursday by Chesterton, which is really quite fascinating with this really weird twist at the end that's worth thinking and talking about. My sister's in love with it. Anyway, he said that when he read The Princess and the Goblin, it made a difference to my whole existence, is what he said. So, Untitled L'Engle, also very influenced by him. Twain didn't like him at first, and Twain is funny because Twain's kind of on the other side of things, but then they became friends. There's a picture with him with a whole bunch of famous authors. He knew basically the most famous authors of his day. Here's a few: Tennyson, Dickens, Trollope, Ruskin, Thackeray, Longfellow, and Whitman were some of the authors that he spent time with. He also was friends with Lewis Carroll, which I think is great. And I also didn't, it's interesting too, because I didn't run across this. I didn't make this connection earlier when we were doing Alice in Wonderland and I was learning about Lewis Carroll. Well, Lewis Carroll read out, either he read it out or George MacDonald read it out, but he was friends with the family, and MacDonald's kids loved Alice in Wonderland, and it was MacDonald and his family's reception of Alice in Wonderland and MacDonald's influence that gave kind of Lewis Carroll the courage to submit it to a publisher and get Alice in Wonderland published. So we can thank George MacDonald for Alice in Wonderland too, and for his influence on some of these really awesome 20th century authors. Now, he traveled and he went to France and he fell in love with the Riviera. And I can't remember the name of the exact little town where he settled. It was on the Riviera, something like that, but he founded a literary studio called Casa Coraggio. And of course, I'm all about book groups and lifelong learning and the connection of great thinkers to each other and their discussion of great works. Well, here's another example. George MacDonald actually created a place where authors and readers could come and talk about books and think and read and grow. It became a renowned cultural center where people would travel in to visit, and it became a great center of plays and readings of Dante and Shakespeare. They put on plays and readings of Dante and Shakespeare like crazy there. Now, this is a fun little cute thing about his family too. Acting out plays in that time and place was kind of seen as not super ethical, I guess. Not maybe like always the right thing to do. His family loved to act, and especially his oldest daughter was actually quite a good actress. Well, they did something that was a little unorthodox in their day, and they would act out plays as a family. They almost exclusively did Pilgrim's Progress and Shakespeare. And their family became really famous, not really famous, kind of semi-known for, they became really good at acting out Pilgrim's Progress. And actually, Louisa, to bring in some extra money, would they would practice this, and they had all the costumes, and they would do performances of Pilgrim's Progress, and then that would give them the money to travel abroad, and they would spend the winters in Italy. So super cool. And so very, very grounded in God and truth and all this kind of stuff. Just a great family, great example. Absolutely love them. And it's super cool that they would also be so engaged in classics and want to act out things that would enrich people and inspire people, like Shakespeare and Pilgrim's Progress and Dante. And, you know, maybe today they would, in our environment, they would go a little broader than that. But definitely they wanted to do things that would be inspiring to people and would uplift them and make them feel better and great. So that's a little bit about George MacDonald. He's really such a good man. His children loved him. His son designed a house and built it for him. His other son helped run it, and they were just a united family. Couple resources I'll link for you here. Well, one in particular is georgemacdonald.info, which actually is quite informative. I found some of the best information I've given you today here on that page, and he's got the people that he knew and influenced, and his wife and his children and his siblings, and I can't remember what all the things are, but they're up at the top, and you can just click on them, and you'll get really interesting information that you wouldn't be able to find other places. But I recommend all of his works, the collection of sermons, and I'm sure anything by him is marvelous, although I've only read 2 of his books so far. So I'm on that journey to learn more about him and read more of him, and I recommend him highly. See you next time.